Hello there, my name is Nalani Brown. I am the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones. Picking up on chapter 4 of Mozart's Starling by Leanda Lynn Haupt. It's called What the Starling Said. Hi! Carmen's first word was wobbly and uncertain, but it was a word. She'd said hi, right? Hadn't she? Tom and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to be the one to suggest that a random warbling was an intentionally formed human-like sound produced by our 4-month-old starling chick. But then she said it again, clear as the bright August sky. Hi, hi, hi. Tom and I grabbed hands and jumped up and down. Hi, we sang back. Hi, Carmen. Our baby had said her first word. We ran up to Carmen's aviary and peered inside. Hi, Carmen. She hopped over to see us, turned her head as if to listen, and, as she always would in the future when we tried to get her to talk on request, fell completely silent. But as soon as we returned to the kitchen, hi, we looked back at her. Was she mocking us? Most likely not. She was just enjoying her way of expressing herself, one that would become, far more than any of us could have ever imagined, an integral part of the life of our household. It is a surprise to most contemporary Americans that starlings can talk, that they are gifted mimics of environmental sounds, other birds, music, and the human voice. In this, they surpass crows and ravens and are on par with birds of the parrot family. But the fact of starling mimicry was common knowledge in other times and places. Shakespeare clearly expected his 16th century audiences, 170 years before Mozart, to understand the reference in Henry IX that inspired Eugene Schieffelin's Central Park starling introductions. I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak. Most of Shakespeare's audience were not aristocratic or particularly literary or even educated. Yet, if they had not known that starlings could talk, the plot point would have made no sense. And such knowledge is older still. In the 1st century, the Roman author, military commander, and natural philosopher Pliny the Elder raised starlings for study and recorded that Julius Caesar, among early statesmen, also kept them and taught them to parley Greek and Latin. Disastrously for the starlings, it was believed in 16th century Britain that if one used a silver sixpence to slit a starling's tongue, the bird could be taught to speak more impressively. Soon after the hi, we realized that, although Carmen had formed her first human word, it had not been her first act of mimicry. A couple of weeks earlier, she had started making an odd sound, one we hadn't heard from her before, and that wasn't in the innate starling repertoire of whistles and squawks that she was perfecting in her spare time. It was a quick up and down and ee-oo, 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 3 or 4 like that in a rapid succession. It sounded to me a little like the song of a common yellow-throated warbler, a bird that Carmen never heard. Then, just a few nights after the hi, I'd poured myself a little glass of Chardonnay and was using the vacuum, the plastic cup apparatus that sucks the extra air out of a wine bottle through a rubber stopper, when I heard, ee-oo, ee-oo, ee-oo. I stood, mouth agape, until I recovered enough to yell, "Tom! Tom! Tom!" He came running. Listen. And just as I started to lift the pump, Carmen joined in vacuum and startling, almost indistinguishable. I'm sure this reflects poorly on me somehow. The first repetitive environmental noise my starling learned to mimic was the sound of me hitting the bottle. Her vocabulary grew quickly over the next several months. Other than the initial hi greeting, we chose in the main not to attempt to teach Carmen particular words, but to let her vocalizations unfold in tune with her life, within our family. Constant favorites are, "Hi, Carmen," "Hi, honey," and "Come here." The short phrases we utter every day as we pass by her aviary or when we open the hatch and call her over to land on our shoulders. She is good at the kissy sound humans use when calling an animal. She makes 3 in a row, just as we do with her. Sometimes, when she's not trying very hard, she sounds shrill and starling-ish when she imitates human words. Sometimes she sounds like a feathery little person. Meanwhile, Carmen continued to expand her household sound repertoire. After the wine vacuum came the coffee grinder, then the beeping of the microwave oven. Pitch perfect. She integrated all of these sounds, as well as a "kiss me" and "come here" and "hi, honey," into her rambling song bouts. She would also often make sounds individually, just calling them out one at a time and at random, or so I thought at first. It took me far too long. And I feel quite stupid about this, to notice something else, something startling and beautiful. Carmen imitates the coffee grinder, an unpleasantly loud but accurate when I open the jar of coffee beans and pour them into the machine. Every evening, I walk into the kitchen to grind the beans for the next morning. There's Carmen, eager to announce, first, the kerclunk of the coffee jar lid as I set it on the counter. Then, when I open the microwave door, she immediately interjects an eerily mechanical beep, beep, beep. And the wine vacuum sound when she hears the clink of a bottle. All of this made me realize that, like these household sounds, the words she imitates are not called out at random. When I come downstairs in the morning, it is not the microwave or the kissing sounds I hear first, but the greeting. "Hi, Carmen. Hi, Carmen. Hi, Carmen." The first words I say to her each day. When I stop to peek in her aviary, "Come here." All participatory, antic-participatory, all involved, all cognizant of what's going on orally in her world and what precipitates what. She's basically saying, I know what's going on. I am part of this. I am filled with wonder and with questions. Meredith West is an ethologist emeritus at Indiana University and the lead author of an iconic 1990 Scientific American paper that explored the subject of Mozart's Starling and the relational capacities of starling pets. It was West's paper that confirmed to me that the story I'd heard about Mozart's pet was indeed based in fact, and her work brought to light the details of Mozart's notebook for an English-speaking audience. She also kept starlings in her home so she could understand how Mozart fell for such a bird. But the heart of West's work is really the oral complexity of starling vocalizations and the character of communication possible between starlings and humans. According to West, the vocal interaction we experience with Carmen is typical. West refers to it as a kind of social sonar, or echolocation. Starlings toss out sounds to see what comes back to them. Where, for a bat, the reward of echolocation is a meal of mosquitoes, for a starling, the reward appears to be a sense of comfort and belonging. Carmen's verbal and oral participation is a way of locating herself in her surroundings, which for a starling are not just physical, but also social. Response from the world around her is essential. In 1983, Meredith West and her colleagues carried out a pioneering study on a starling mimicry. 7 starlings were captured as 5-day-old nestlings, just like Carmen. 4 were females and 4 were males. West's chicks were all hand-raised together in the lab until they were about 30 days old, at which point they were split into 3 groups. Each group went to live in a household with human caretakers, but all under different circumstances. A male and a female went to live in a home where, like Carmen, they were raised with constant human contact and treated as part of the family. They were often let out to fly free, were fed by hand, and were included in group conversations. They were sung to and whistled to. There was no attempt to teach the birds particular words or songs or to mimic any sounds that the starlings made except when doing so came naturally. Another male and female went to a home where the humans did not interact with them at all, except for what little was necessary to keep them fed and their enclosures clean. The last 3 birds went to live together on a screened porch in the same home as the first pair of birds, those that were living as part of a family. These screened-off birds could hear everything that the inside birds heard, the human voices, the singing, the vacuum cleaner, but people in the home didn't approach them, talk to them as individuals, or handle them. It turns out that among starlings that live with humans, Carmen is not alone in her eagerness to join the household's conversation. In West's study, all 7 birds mimicked natural sounds, mechanical sounds in their environment, and other birds. But only the birds that interacted closely with humans mimicked human words and voices. And only these birds mimicked environmental sounds in the context of what their human caretakers were doing. West and the other starling keepers in her study reported that the birds kept them constantly on their toes, readily mimicking a variety of sounds, most commonly greetings and goodbyes. Hi, good morning, hey, buddy, night-night, go to your cage, attributions, silly bird, you're so pretty, see you soon, baboon, you're kidding, conversational fragments, what you doing? Okay, I guess so. This is Mr. Struthers calling. And household noises. Cat meowing, meow. Dog barking, bark, 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 bark. Door squeaking, squirr. Keys rattling, choo, choo, choo. Dishes clinking, clink, clink, clink. Many people who live with starlings report becoming self-conscious about tics they never knew they had until their starlings mimicked them back. Sighing, coughing, sniffing, tongue clicking, odd little laughs. In Meredith West's academic household, a resident starling would perch on the professor's shoulder and mutter, "Basic research. It's true. I guess that's right." And when someone else walked into the room, the bird would announce, "I have a question." The implication is that mimicry has a rich and complex social aspect, that it's valuable and useful for starlings to connect naturally, to connect orally with those they are most closely bonded to, whether that is another starling or a human. West and her team also found that the family-raised birds imitated the cadence of human speech, whether they were forming recognizable words or not, just like a human baby starts to sound like it is making words before it actually is. The bird version of baby talk. Carmen does this all the time. She'll be rattling away, whistling and gurgling like a wild starling, and I'll look at her and say, "What is all this noise?" She'll stop the starling talk, tilt her head, and say with a perfect American English lilt, "Why, it's nothing. Say, that soup on the stove smells delicious. Why don't you let me out and we'll have a nice game of backgammon while it simmers?" She doesn't produce the actual words, of course, just the up and down cadence and intonation, almost exactly like my own. It's the same thing as a person imitating French or Chinese or some language that they don't actually speak. It is easy to guess what language is being imitated, even though the words are nonsense. When my family was over this holiday season, they kept telling me, "Carmen said, 'Merry Christmas.' I heard her." She didn't, but you could imagine it. She was just baby talking household English. And let me offer a piece of advice. Never teach a starling to say Merry Christmas unless you want to hear it all year long. Birds raised within earshot of humans but without close contact do not behave this way. Carmen's vocalizations are relational, a kind of conversation. They are her way of being with us. It's kind of unnerving, actually, to be sitting alone in the living room on a dark, rainy night, cuddled down by the fire with a book, and hear a little voice from the next room say, with perfect inflection, "Come here." She sounds so hopeful. I can't help getting up and walking over. Here I am. Carmen jumps up to the front perch, puts her face to the wire, and we touch nose to bill. "Go to sleep," I tell her, "and I'll turn out the lights." All of this makes me ponder the oral relationship between Mozart and Starr. By Mozart's time, the keeping and training of birds with good singing voices had become common among the European middle and upper classes, aristocracy, and even royalty. In the early 1700s, royal Parisian supervisor of the woods, Herveau de Chanteloup, had a second job description: guardian of the princess's canary birds. Most in demand were the bird species with vocal agility: canaries, bullfinches, linnets, East Indian nightingales, actually a kind of minnow, and starlings. Little 8-holed bird flutes called flagolets became popular among those with the leisure to train their birds in song, a fashionable hobby. Mozart would absolutely have known about this trend, but it is unlikely that, as a professional composer with a house full of fine instruments, he would have deigned to purchase one of the popular flutes. In 1717, The Bird Fancier's Delight was published in London. There's a note here. I would have her come up and read with me, but like many birds, Carmen acquires a kind of confused agitation as the sun goes down. Keepers of budgies and other pet birds will recognize the behavior. If she's not inside her aviary when darkness falls, she gets disoriented, bashing into walls and windows that she navigates readily during the day, and she is easily startled. We make sure she is closed safely in her aviary by sunset. In 1717, The Bird Fancier's Delight was published in London. A slender book of tunes, properly composed with the compass and faculty of each bird, with a few tunes for each of 11 species, including 3 for the starling. The pieces for starlings in The Bird Fancier's Delight are decidedly unstarling-esque, composed in a straight G major or F major and rolling along prettily and predictably, with no flights of starling fancy whatsoever. I have performed them for Carmen on various instruments, violin, piano, harp, and asked my daughter to play them on Carmen's favorite instrument, the cello. Carmen does what she always does when we play music for her. She tilts her head attentively and curiously. She is, as ever, a good listener. When music she loves comes on stereo or is performed live on one of those household instruments, she sings along exuberantly. But with these tunes, she offers nothing more than a polite little squeak here and there, and perhaps a perfunctory whistle and wing fluff. She's unimpressed. I can't imagine what 18th century starlings would have displayed any more interest in The Bird Fancier's Delight than Carmen does. But bullfinches prove to be apt pupils of the tunes and learn their songs readily. Bullfinches are fat, handsome little birds, topped with oil-black caps and gray backs that are set off against unusual persimmon-colored breasts. In Germany, bullfinches were captured in groups and taught to sing for show and sale. The popular method of professional bird trainers was to keep the young birds in complete silence and darkness, often without food, so their senses would be formed by nothing but the tutored tunes. Some trainers even blinded their birds with hot metal spikes. This kind of music by torture was composer David Rothenberg called in his excellent Why Birds Sing, was often successful with the gifted bullfinches. William Cowper's 1788 poem, on the death of Mrs. Throckmorton's bullfinch attests. And though by nature mute, or only with the whistle blessed, well taught, he all the sounds expressed of flageolet or flute. Those that survived the abuse and sang well commanded high prices in the shops. Star, worth just a few cruiser with his bits of mimicked motifs, would have been considered a musical hack by comparison, at least at first glance. Among the birds commonly kept for song, only the starlings and mynas were true mimics. It's an important distinction. Most songbirds possess an inherited ability to learn the songs unique to their own species, usually sung by the male, and often during breeding season. This spring song is a proclamation of breeding readiness. A strong, exuberant song helps to attract a mate and declare and defend a nesting territory. If you take a walk in the woods with a good birder in the right season, she will be able to announce the identity of the birds singing high and invisibly in the leafy trees based solely on their song. Most passeries learn their species song when they're young. So when they are ready for the breeding season, the year after their birth, in the autumn, we can hear the young males of vocal species like house finches or white-crowned and white-throated sparrows singing wobbly versions of their songs, beginning practice for the spring. Sweet sounds, and for most of these birds, there is a learning window. If they do not learn their species songs in the first year or so of life, they're unlikely to learn them at all. Some birds raised in captivity will be able to sing a version of their species song, not usually a very good one. But many need the live tutoring they receive in the wild form from other males. And if captive birds are introduced to another song instead of their own species song during this sensitive song learning window, some will learn that song instead, which means that for some species, the song is learned rather than innate. These birds have an inherited tendency to learn the song they are exposed to most often when very young. Just as the trained pet bullfinches did, as long as it is in the vocal range of their usual species song. This is very different from the true mimicry we see in starlings. Mimics do is sing a song unique to their species. In the case of the starling, this includes a long series of tea kettle whistles, clattering, and shrieks that many are reluctant to term a song. But true mimics, like starlings, do something else too. They imitate sounds from their environment, novel and improbable sounds that lie far outside of the usual explanation of birdsong. They appear to select these sounds at will. We can attempt to teach starlings sounds and tunes, and they will turn their nose up at some and latch onto others. They are mysteriously discerning and certainly have no regard for what we want them to mimic. Meredith West thought her birds had failed to learn anything from words and songs she'd played them on cassette tapes until she discovered one of them mimicking the hiss of the recording tape between phrases. This kind of true mimicry is uncommon. Passerine mimics include the starlings and mynas, the corvids, jays, ravens, magpies, crows, and mockingbirds. Outside of the passerines, parrots are the most famous and gifted mimics. All these birds will imitate other birds and animals, environmental sounds, musical motifs, and human voices. While a young bullfinch can learn to sing a song in its impressive native range, unlike a mimic, it cannot imitate random and novel phrases. Mimicry indicates a sophistication in relationship to sound that involves a plasticity of behavior and consciousness that goes far beyond the instinctive. New research at Duke University suggests that the brains of parrots display a unique genetic pattern. The area of the brain associated with vocalization is surrounded by another layer, or shell, of ultra-specialized neurons for sound recognition and creation, a song system within a song system. As the researchers put it, this may be true for the brains of non-parrot mimics as well. Humans, ever self-absorbed, homed in on the capacity of certain birds to imitate our own speech right away. And it became one of the first areas of avian vocal research. Pliny, the elder, kept magpies alongside his starlings. He noticed how eager the birds were to learn new words, and now, once fixed on a word, they would work and fuss over it until it was perfected. Carmen certainly does this. One of the first phrases she chose to mimic among those oft heard in our home was, "Hi, honey." The word honey came out rickety and birdish and strange for days, but she'd turn it over and over on her tongue. And when she had it, she proclaimed it loudly and, to all appearances, even joyfully, not shyly, as when she was still perfecting the sound. Pliny declared that a magpie who has trouble learning a word will suffer such angst over his failure, and that he will die of it. He mused wonderfully. They get fond of uttering particular words, and not only learn them, but love them, and secretly ponder them with careful reflection, not concealing their engrossment. It is an established fact that if the difficulty of a word beats them, this causes their death. Secretly pondering, perhaps, but Carmen, I hope, is not so angst-ridden. In spite of Pliny's early start on the subject, and even after centuries of study, mimicry in birds is little understood. No single theory applies for all birds, and there are elements of mimicry that defy explanation altogether. The classic theory with starlings is that males use mimicry in the main to impress females. As a female starling, Carmen is not supposed to be a gifted mimic or songster, but living with a female starling, I can heartily attest that they create many of the same song elements that males do, and obviously they can be capable mimics. I was shocked and alarmed, though, when in April of Carmen's first year of life, she stopped vocalizing completely. She didn't just stop the incessant whistles and the "hi, Carmen," and "come here's." It was every single little peep. I freaked out. I coddled her, sang to her, exhorted Claire to set up her cello next to Carmen's aviary and play her favorite Bach suites, with which she had always loved to sing along. Nothing. While I fretted about how I had failed as a starling keeper, I developed two theories. First, I thought that with a social bird, Carmen might be depressed in her life without starling companionship. That maybe her vocal and social skills had slowly been withering away, and I was too dull to notice until she stopped talking altogether. I continued to spend extra time with her, added more mirrors to her habitat so she could keep company with her own image when alone, played tapes of starling vocalizations, and left her listening to her favorite bluegrass music when I had to leave. Nothing. Not one little tweet. She was as friendly and tame as ever, but she didn't make a sound for nearly 3 whole months. During this time, I worked out my second theory. This was the season that, were she not living in a house, Carmen would have been nesting, even though she had no mate, no nest, not even an artificial nest box, and even though she did not lay eggs, she still might have been overcome with this biological imperative to keep her non-existent nest and nestlings safe by remaining absolutely quiet. Her mate, if she'd had one, would accomplish the necessary scolding and chest puffing required to guard the nest from interlopers or predators. Her job was to be silent and still. I granted that this was a more likely hypothesis, but it still seemed improbable. Was she so far removed from the nesting process? Why would this one behavioral imperative take over? And yet, Why should it be any different from the other psychological, physiological changes associated with the seasons that she was displaying? Her legs became lighter pink. Her bill changed from dark to bright golden yellow, both signs of breeding readiness. Perhaps this silence was simply seasonal. I did what I always do when Carmen's behavior baffles me. I threw binoculars around my neck, grabbed a notebook, and headed out into the field. In this case, my urban neighborhood. And I headed to see what the wild starlings were up to. Sure enough, the male birds were in full-voiced territorial glory, and the females were hidden in their nests, silent as stones. This gave me modest hope. Finally, in July, just when I was beginning to despair of ever hearing her voice again, I patted down to make my morning coffee and heard, "Hi, honey." Carmen! I ran over to her aviary, but she was nonchalant, as if nothing had ever been amiss. Then she broke into a long, discordant whistle, and over the next few days she returned to her full, spirited voice. This was just when her brood of non-existent chicks would be fledged and gone, giving her no further need to be secretive and hiding. If you look into starling vocalization research, you'll find papers with titles like Temporal and Sequential Organization of Song Bouts in the Starling. This one describes the function of mimicry as purely mate attraction and makes no mention of whatever of female voices. Every single bird studied was a male. Or there is song acquisition in Sturnus vulgaris, a comparison of the songs of live-tutored, tape-tutored, untutored, and wild-caught males. Males. The study method makes sense. In most passerine species, while females make various chirps and calls, it is the males that do all the true singing. And so naturally, the study of singing starlings has focused on males during their peak singing time, spring and summer, the months that, as Carmen taught me, female starlings go silent. No wonder the female's vocal capacity is not just underestimated, but almost entirely unknown. I spoke to Meredith West about the skewed view of female starling voices. Her study was unique in that more than half the birds involved were female. This was just the luck of the draw. It's hard to sex baby starlings, and they took what they got. In the end, this was fortunate. While it wasn't something West set out to prove, her work uncloaked the extraordinary vocal prowess of female starlings. She agreed with my finding that female starlings could be as vocal and gifted as mimics and gifted mimics as males, especially when they are in a social group, like a family, with whom they want to interact. Both male and female starlings invite researchers to expand on the classic explanation of mimicry. Sure, there is a role in pair bonding, and males do seem to take lead in using mimicry to attract a mate. But once the pair bond is secure, mimicry on both sides appears to be a way of maintaining intimacy between mates. Through the seasons of the year, mimicry continues in both sexes, even though males and females often split into separate flocks. It's a form of connection and belonging among flock mates, of environmental awareness and participation. I am certain that there's more going on with both male and female starling communication and consciousness than we realize. But so much of this understanding cannot be learned in the lab or even in the field, where we experience the habits of starlings and in fits and starts. It can be learned only by the rare privilege of living in constant contact with a wild bird. Just recently, Carmen added a new trick, meowing like the cat. Delilah appeared entirely unamused. Tom, Claire, and I all looked at one another, and Claire sighed. It was bound to happen. From the next room, we can't tell the two apart. Delilah's food bowl is near Carmen's aviary. Unfortunately, this means that the meow Carmen has learned is not some sweet, purry, happy meow, but a crabby, feed me meow. the one our fat Delilah makes while circling her bowl, announcing her firm belief that it's mealtime. As usual, with a new sound, Carmen worked on it, perfected it, and then mixed it into her repertoire. Those bouts of singing where she throws all the mimic sounds she knows into one long string. She would, as she did with other sounds, single out the meow and call it at seemingly random moments. And, also as usual, she did something else that took us way too long to comprehend. Tom noticed it at first. He walked into the kitchen and Carmen looked at him and said, "Hi, Carmen." Then Delilah walked in and Carmen looked at her and said, "Meow." At first we thought it had to be chance, but it has happened too many times, too consistently. Carmen greets us, human and cat, each in our own language. Carmen has learned hi. Hi, Carmen is a greeting, and she uses it as one. But what about come here? This phrase in the context of Carmen's life usually means we're going to hang out together. I open her cage and say, "Come here," and hold out my hand. What about those times that I'm in the next room and I hear her call, "Come here"? Is it a signal of desire? Does she want me to come there? I would not suggest that she has any sense of the grammatical structure of the words, or even that she recognizes them as words, as compared to environmental sounds. But given what else she has taught me about the way starlings understood context, it is altogether possible that she has learned the cause and effect relationship between the sound "come here" and the result, my presence, her favorite thing. I realize that this might sound far-fetched. We're talking about a bird, and such complexity of consciousness exceeds what we typically imagine birds to be capable of. But really, what I am suggesting is analogous. The dog who carries its leash over to its person and looks up expectantly. Leash equals hope of a walk. Why couldn't Carmen's "come here" not equal the sound of Leanda coming over to the aviary? This question presses the boundaries of what we know about avian consciousness and human-bird communication. Yes, but it is past time for such pressing. For so long, bird song has been considered a function of breeding and territoriality. But the earth and its beings are extravagantly wild, full of unexpected wonders. It is time to turn from our textbooks and listen to the birds themselves. Carmen's influence on my never-ending life pilgrimage in the natural world is profound. I find that when I walk into the world these days, I cannot help but say hi to the starlings I see, and all the other birds too. I'm so accustomed to Carmen's friendliness, I almost expect that one of them will fly to my shoulder and say hi right back. Writing on her blog, Myth and More, author, artist, and folklorist Terry Windling reminds us, many an old story begins with the words, "Long ago, when animals could speak," invoking a time when the boundary lines between the human and the animal worlds were less clearly drawn than they are today, and more easily crossed. Perhaps the corollary would be just as good as an opening for a tale. Long ago, when animals could speak, but long ago, when people could listen. I look back to my naive early notion that I would obtain a starling to study in support of my own ideas, the story I thought I wanted to tell. But when I managed to hush my own voice and just listen, I discovered that Carmen has become not just part of the story, but the storyteller, whispering in my ear, telling me what needs to be written, to be spoken, to be sung into the world. That is the end of Chapter 4 of Mozart's Starling by Leanda Lynn Haupt. We will pick up on Chapter 5 next time. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. I'm Nalani Brown. Thank you.